Savannah, Georgia exudes charm. Behind it all lies the hardworking Historic Savannah Foundation. Since 1955, this nonprofit has been dedicated to preserving Savannah's architectural heritage and cultural legacy. I had the pleasure of sitting down with the Foundation's Director of Preservation and Historic Properties, Ellie Isaacs. Of course, we talked all about Savannah and its very rich history, but we also talked about preservation as a whole, and I found this to be such an enriching conversation that I hope you'll enjoy. Welcome to Grandma's Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host and the founder of the Grand Millennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma's silver. Ellie, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to chat with you. I feel like we were both just kind of laughing. This is going to be, I think, a really fun conversation because I don't think people realize how enmeshed they are in preservation or how much they actually appreciate preservation, or the work, rather, I should say, that preservationists do. So I think this is a really fun conversation that we're about to delve into. But why don't you go ahead, introduce yourself, introduce your role at the Historic Savannah Foundation, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me today. My name is Ellie Isaacs. I'm the Director of Preservation and Historic Properties at the Historic Savannah Foundation, located in Savannah, Georgia.
And could you tell us a little bit about, and this is probably a loaded question, right? Because preservation is never straightforward, but could you tell us a little bit about what the foundation's role is?
Yeah, so Historic Savannah Foundation is the nonprofit preservation organization in Savannah. We advocate, our tagline is that we advocate to save the people, places, and stories of Savannah's past, present, and future. And it really is all encompassing of everything that we do. My role in particular, we are big into advocacy, education. We have a revolving fund that we'll get into, I'm sure, in this conversation. We're very multifaceted in all the things that we do and accomplish.
So for those who, and myself included, I know bits and pieces about, Savannah and its history and some of its landmark areas, but could you talk us through a little bit about because I'm sure this is an exhaustive list, some of the key landmarks, sites that the foundation has played a role in helping to preserve, because I think a lot of people are visiting and not understanding how much work goes into ensuring they can even step foot onto those properties.
Absolutely. That's actually a really good question. So, and it kind of dives into our history too as a foundation. So I'll kind of cover a little bit of both. So our foundation was started by 7 women who bound together to save the Davenport House, which is currently a Historic Savannah Foundation property. It's a house museum. But they bound together to save the Davenport House because it was up for demolition to become a parking lot to one of the adjacent funeral homes. And this came following the demolition of City Market in Savannah. And if you ever do any research on Savannah, the City Market area is right in the heart of downtown of the Landmark District. It's very popular, very historic, obviously. And the destruction of City Market, where a lot of people used to come to sell goods and services and things like that, it was really like the heartbeat of downtown. And it was demolished and later replaced with a parking garage. And then since then has been rehabilitated back into a square because the City Market building itself was actually in the square, which is
sorry
uncommon.
to interrupt, but what is our timeline that we're looking at here? Is this recent or a while?
No, this was like in the 50s. Thank
Okay.
you. Yeah. So this was in the 50s. And when the preservation movement really started in the country, and so, or at least started gaining traction in the country. And so when that was demolished, when City Market was demolished, that was kind of the first thing that sparked these women's interest as to things that were going on. And then it was like the next thing was the Davenport House. And so they bound together to save that because they didn't want another parking lot downtown. Downtown at that point was blighted. It was, there wasn't a lot of interest there. And so they were really trying to do something revolutionary at that time. And so since then, obviously, Historic Savannah Foundation came out of that, was formed out of that. And since then, like I mentioned, we have a revolving fund that has saved over 420 properties in Savannah. Yeah. And like I said, we can get into what all that means in a minute, but we've saved all of those buildings. And one of the newer buildings, I guess you could say, that we've saved is the Kaya House, which is a pretty local landmark in the Kyler Brownville Historic District, which is towards the west of the Landmark District. It's a historically African-American neighborhood. And the Kaya House was owned by Dr. Calvin and Virginia Kaya. And Virginia Kaya was an artist, and she was a civil rights movement activist, her and her husband both. They really wanted to create a space where everybody could come to enjoy art and make art. And so they made their house literally into an art museum and community space. So yeah, and that house after they passed, the house sat in probate for over 20 years. And Historic Savannah Foundation helped get it out of probate, and it went through our revolving fund. And now it's been recently purchased towards the end of last year by someone who is going to make it back into a museum and community space and truly like paying homage to them. So that's like the most recent bigger one that we've been involved in, but we've been involved in a lot, you could say,
I'm
over the
sure.
almost 70 years of our history. So
Absolutely. Are you specifically working with sites and houses that are on the National Register, or
we
just
haven't,
beloved by the community,
yeah.
grassroots sort of thing?
So we do both, actually.
Okay.
So we have several National Register historic districts here. Obviously, we have the main one is the one that everybody's familiar with, which is the Landmark Historic District. But then there are also other local districts and national districts actually that surround that landmark district, such as Victorian, Streetcar, Kyler Brownville that I just mentioned. There's several. And then we even have twice as many probably potential districts that just haven't been listed yet. So we do
Okay.
work in all areas. More recently, over the recent years, our efforts have been more focused on areas surrounding the landmark district as far as things for like revolving fund and things like that, just because of property values. But we stay very much in tune with everything that's going on in all of the districts.
Okay. That's so
Yeah.
interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
there has to be an exorbitant amount of historic
Yes.
properties there. And I mean, what are there criteria? I mean, I know every city, town has its own, ordinances and that sort of thing for historic properties. But I mean, there are so many in Savannah. How do they narrow down what that looks like and what is worth preserving, what's considered historic, valuable? I
Yeah.
don't like to use the word valuable, but
Right, because value is different depending on the person that you talk to, and there's multiple
Right.
different criteria to list something's worth, right? And so, like you said, ordinance wise, we have an ordinance for the landmark district slash local downtown historic district. That's one. Then we also, and there's a board, the Historic District Board of Review, that I actually used to be chair of, that reviews all of the applications and things in that area. Then we have another commission, we call it the Historic Preservation Commission, that regulates and has its own ordinance that reviews things in Victorian, Streetcar, Kyler Brownville, and the conservation districts, which are only demolition only reviews. It's a little spread out. Like you said, like there's a lot to cover, but I feel like it's managed pretty well. Anything else outside of those local districts that are still within the city limits tend to go to the Metropolitan Planning Commission. We have multiple boards here to try to do all of the oversight that we can, because arguably anything 50 years or older is and could be considered historic for its own purposes. And so there's a lot of oversight here.
Now, when you do, and I might be kind of getting ahead of myself, say you're involved in the successful preservation of a property.
Mm-hmm.
Is it something that, because it's preserved through your fund, the foundation then owns and manages, or does it get outsourced to other, like, what does that ongoing work look like?
Yeah, so that's basically that's our revolving fund, I think is what you're talking about. So our
Okay.
revolving fund is one of our biggest missions that we do. It's the biggest portion of my job. And so basically what that means is I am constantly looking for buildings that are blighted or, like the sore thumb of the neighborhood or the street for us to purchase through our revolving fund. Typically it's properties that are not listed for sale on the market, and it's reaching out and building relationships with people and getting them to sell us that property, knowing that our intentions are good and that we're trying to do the right things. And
Mhm.
so when we get those properties, we then release an RFP out to the public. Hey, this is the property we have. Here's some general history. This is what we're hoping to do. And so we get people's proposals in of what they're trying to do to the property, if they're going to live in it, if they're going to rehab it slash restore it and rent it out, like hold the property, like what the intention is. We go through a process where we pick the best person. It's not always based about money. We truly pick the best person for that property. When it sells to when we sell to them, we attach our easements to it, like our exterior facade easements to it always in perpetuity. And then sometimes we do affordability covenants as well for affordable housing.
Okay.
And so when that happens, when we sell, there's timelines involved in the paperwork of when they have to restore by so many months. And throughout that entire process, I do site visits every week. I'm a resource to these people, whoever they are, to help them do the best preservation practices throughout the entire time. When everything is said and done, we do an annual easement because now there's an easement on it, annual easement inspections to make sure that the people that have gone through this fund, like I said, for the 420 some that we have currently, are maintained and kept up well. So it's truly like a start to finish and then an ongoing process.
This is, again, I'm sure it's more of a case by case basis, but
Yeah.
what is the average timeline like from the time that you're recognizing or have an awareness of a site to let's all do a round of applause, we've done it?
Right.
I mean, that
Yeah,
could be years, that could be.
it really varies because sometimes it takes a long time to build those relationships with people that to where that they're willing to let their property go. Sometimes they decide to ultimately not do it, and obviously that's fine. Sometimes it really varies. So I've got properties that I'm following up with now that I'm new in this role that predecessors a few years ago started the conversation, and then maybe it just kind of lagged for a while to try to see if, okay, hey, we talked about this years ago. Are you willing now? But otherwise, idealistically, it's, from when we engage to securing the property to, doing the RFP process and doing the whole restoration and things, I would say probably 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
I would
really
just like
varies
that
depending
to
on the size of the
resonate with people
property.
who are listening because
Yeah, it's like
it's so
it's a
much work.
process.
It
It
is so
is. It's a
much work.
process.
Yeah.
And it really depends too on the size of the building and how long the restoration or the rehab itself is going to take, because that's the biggest chunk of time usually.
What, and I'm sure this again varies, kind of a case by case basis based
Mhm.
on which properties, site, that sort of thing, because they all have their own cultural significance. But in general, whether it's, kind of the foundation's perspective or your perspective as an individual who's passionate about this work, what would you say, like, what is driving you, the foundation, to want to preserve Savannah's history at large? Each site, of course, has its own significance, but
Yeah.
what makes Savannah's district, because this is a plural, right? There's so many,
Yeah.
but why are they culturally significant? Why are they important to not just the region's history, but the United States? Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is?
For HSF, it's our mission, right? Like it's our mission to do this. But I think what you're trying to get at is the main importance of the work
Yes.
is to truly keep Savannah special, because Savannah is special. And a lot of people say that to us all the time, people that have never been here or people that are locals, we constantly reflect and we're like, we're so lucky to get to live here when so many people choose to vacation here, right? To visit here. Savannah has this truly unique sense of place because of the city grid, because of the scale of the buildings, because of the architecture, because of all the stories that are embodied in this place. And I think that that is the that's the main driver, is that we want these things to remain here in perpetuity so that other generations can get to experience them and enjoy them. Because sometimes the only thing that remains of something special, or like a special event or a person or whatever, is the tangible place as the connection to the past. I think that answers your question. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. You kind of segued into this pretty naturally, and this was one of the questions that I had for you, which was the role that community plays in preservation, and for the foundation specifically, what that looks like.
Yeah, so community plays a huge role. And it's not just the professionals in the field. It's also the local people that play such a huge role. And education is obviously a huge part of that. And transparency and being informed is even bigger, because people can't advocate for things that they're not aware of or they don't understand the importance of. Community engagement is probably one of the biggest things that we do. And I feel like we're constantly trying to do even more than we've done previously, if that makes sense. So, obviously it's good at these meetings, for example, like at these review board meetings, it's always good when professionals show up and advocate for a place, or even just give opinions, right, of like potential work that's going to happen or a new development or things like that. But it's also even more important to have local neighbors and advocates come and express their thoughts and opinions and concerns as well. I think it plays a huge role.
Let's look at this from a couple of different ways, but you're trying to advocate for a property, a site, and garner community support, whether it's the local, regional level. That's important for people to speak up and to back you. Then on the education piece, what does that look like? The engagement, I'm sure also there's fundraising involved. So what does that?
And awareness too. So I don't get into, my role does not deal with fundraising. Like, we have a director of development who deals with membership and fundraising and things like that. But it's more of people being informed about things that are going on in their adjacent areas. So not only I wouldn't even say just support, like if a petition or something is coming before a review board and they have a lot of concerns about it, or they have a lot of questions, they deserve to understand that they have a right to that, obviously, and that there's a public forum for them to express those and get those addressed. And a lot of people, I don't want to say a lot of people, because in Savannah, a lot of people know that they can do that. But there's some areas where they don't know they can do that. Sometimes there's misconceptions about developments that are going on. There's opportunities, the education part, I want people to realize that there's opportunities that they could also be taking advantage of, as far as programs like through the state, individual listing to the National Register, or because you're in a district, you can do tax credits or tax freezes, or like, you know what I mean? There's so many layers to it. There's so many layers to everything.
No, I think, and it's so important that you're talking about making sure people have that awareness. I am outside of Philadelphia. I'm in a small town outside of it's a pretty populated area, even when you creep outside of the Philadelphia area, but I'm in a small town outside of that. We even had, I sat on my historic commission years ago, but I think people don't realize sometimes that even on small local levels, these things exist, and preservation is constantly in flux. And
absolutely,
a lot of these organizations, if you even have a little bit of interest in the history or just care about your community and want to make sure things are, progress is progress. You can't stop change, but you can help to ensure change happens on a reasonable scale.
Right, so, exactly.
So I think, just to encourage people, if you have any interest at all in anything along the lines of preservation or your community or seeing what's going on, or just like a general curiosity, a lot of those historic commissions will let you sit in on a meeting They
Absolutely. They're
will,
open to the public.
yeah, they're open to
So,
the public. A lot of people don't know that the meeting minutes are often posted publicly on the township
mhm,
website. So you have
right.
access to a lot of these things that I think people don't know to look for.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I would encourage people to go do a little digging. It shouldn't take that much work, maybe, hopefully
Right.
not.
It shouldn't.
It
Keyword, it
shouldn't,
shouldn't.
yeah, but
Or
hopefully it's
even if you have a
front and center.
nonprofit like us, like we love it when people reach out to us and ask us for, I get calls all the time about like, hey, who's a good preservation contractor? Or who can help me fix my windows? Or, I have some stuff and I'd like to salvage it while I'm doing this renovation. Who do I call? It's just reach out,
Yeah,
to your nonprofit because they can be a big resource for you too, and help you understand or get you plugged in or at least point you in the right direction of where to go.
absolutely. And I can't speak for your organization. Let me know if I'm wrong, but many could use volunteers.
Oh
Many,
yeah, absolutely.
there's always a need for
Yeah,
involvement.
exactly.
So that community piece is huge in preservation. I don't think people often realize that it isn't just, I mean, of course, fundraising is important, is often critical, but it
Yes.
is not the only way to give. And
Right.
I think that that's important for people to, if you don't have to be a millionaire to be a preservationist, is
Right.
I guess where I'm going there. We mentioned a minute ago kind of the concept of modernization and
Yeah.
change and progress, right? So let's talk a little bit about that because Savannah is unique in that it is a big giant tourist destination. It's
Yes.
huge for year-round travel,
Yep.
year-round visitors. In doing that, you're probably getting lots of people who are moving to the area and a lot of new development and growth. So, what does that look like for Savannah and for the foundation? I think a lot of people have the idea that preservation is kind of like everyone that's involved in preservation work wants to go back to the dinosaur age. They don't want modernization, they don't want growth, and that's just not a reality.
No,
You can
that's
have
not reality.
both. So, for Savannah and for the foundation, what do you think that looks like? How do you blend the two?
That's a super interesting question, considering something that we just dealt with at a
Oh,
review board meeting yesterday. It is never our intention as a foundation or even myself personally for everything to be stuck in a time warp. That's not functional. Like you said, that's not reality. And you can't thrive that way. As you said before, I think the important thing that lies in all of this is compatible infill and development. You don't want it to look fake historic either, present a false sense of historicism. Really modern design, like the thing that got put in front of us yesterday, is not bad. It's just about scale and height and compatibility with what's around it, having it be really well done. You can't expect to, like I said, you can't expect to be stuck in a time warp forever. We're not Colonial Williamsburg. They have their own model and that's great for them, but that's not the way that a functional modern city works.
mhm.
And we advocate for things like that all the time. Like we try to be very transparent that rehab is always great, obviously, and new construction is necessary in some areas, but it's got to be compatible in a sense because Savannah is really unique in the fact that I truly feel, and I'm sure others probably feel this way as well, but I truly feel like a lot of eras are represented throughout history and like architectural history really well. And so it's really a timeline. We have to have new things that are done well that don't look like anywhere USA,
Mhm.
and also don't create that false sense of historicism like Disney World either.
That is so
And
funny because I
so,
was just going to use Disney as
yes,
the example. No shade to Disney. We love
yeah,
you.
no shade to Disney. We all love Disney and Dole Whip, but you have to move forward, but in a really thoughtful way. So that's something that we constantly, like I said, I go to all of these review board meetings. I go to all of the city meetings every month. So I'm very plugged in on everything that's going on. And it's something that we constantly, I don't want to say are in battle with, but like we're constantly trying to address. So,
Yeah, it's a challenge because I think we often will see, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the foundation. I'm speaking on
no,
behalf of myself and my own experiences. But I think we are often seeing in many areas, probably in any area, there are always these very two strong divisive schools of thought.
yes,
But a lot of the time, preservation is really just kind of finding the middle.
I mean, that's true.
So, I even remember when I was on my historic commission, I live in a teeny tiny town that no one even locally hardly knows about, or grew up in, I should say. I've moved 7 minutes down the road, technically a different town. It was a lot of old Victorian buildings. It was an old mill town. And
Yeah,
of course, we want, like, would we love a restaurant? Sure, because we don't want to
right,
drive 15 minutes to go to dinner. At the same time, it's being cautious of what restaurant is coming in.
right.
What does that exterior look like? I remember we were pitched a building. It was part of a clubhouse for a golf club,
Mm,
but it was so out of place. But my first thought that I guess I said out loud was, this looks like a Tommy Bahamas. What is it
yeah,
doing in this little Pennsylvania town with Victorian buildings and
right. You have
open
to think of the
land?
context.
I mean,
Yes,
it just looked
right,
so, it was beautiful. It was a gorgeous, gorgeous building. But if you were to stick it on this cornfield,
right. It doesn't look
it
appropriate.
was ridiculous. And so we had a whole conversation about, how do you, like, we love the concept. We love the idea. Everyone here will benefit from this, but like, you just got to work with us on the exterior. That's
Right.
all we're
Well,
asking.
because a lot of developers, I feel like, and not all developers, I'm not trying to shade all of them, but a lot of developers or even big corporations or whoever, they have this model, they have their
Right.
brand, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, when you're going into a place that is historic in nature,
Mhm.
right, and has its own sense of place, there should be modifications to where, like you said, you can meet in the middle to where the brand still feels represented, and then you're complementing the context that's going to be surrounding you.
Absolutely.
Um, because that's so important. You don't want to feel like you're in Anywhere USA. You want to feel like you're in Savannah. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. And especially when you're in an area that has so much, it's entrenched in history.
yes,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah,
I'm with you there.
yeah.
On that note, you mentioned something that got me thinking, because I am not uber familiar with the different districts of Savannah. But could you talk us through what some of the districts look like? I know you mentioned, like, there's a timeline of architecture.
Mhm.
So are there certain areas that are more representative of different architectural styles than others? And just for those who are not familiar with Savannah, haven't been to Savannah, and what Savannah is all about and what it encompasses Savannah, for those who just don't have that visual or understanding.
So Savannah, just for general, general orientation purposes, the north is the river, right? So Landmark downtown district faces the river. Everything is oriented north. Obviously, that's where the city first started. That's where the city was founded, was in the Landmark district. And as time progressed, obviously development moved south. And so from the Landmark district, going south, you then have Victorian district, which is obviously full of Victorian buildings. That's like the main typology that's there. And then there's also further south from that is what we call Thomas Streetcar District, because obviously at that time streetcars were becoming more prevalent. There used to be streetcar tracks that ran through everywhere. So it's a little bit different, like urban planning wise. As you move south, we have the Oglethorpe Plan, which is very iconically known, where the square is in the center, and then there's tithing and trust lots around it, and it's a grid pattern.
Okay.
And that's repeated multiple times in the Landmark District. And that's what makes Savannah so special. And then once you hit the park, Forsyth Park, then that's when it starts getting Victorian and then Thomas Square. So the developmental patterns, we still have a grid, but it changes over time as it changes with development. It continuously keeps growing and moving south. And of course, development also moves east and west as it's moving south. Even in the very beginning with with the Landmark District, there was still some development on the east and west towards right on the river, like development, the port, then there's the people that couldn't afford to live in proper downtown Savannah, they kind of had communities to the east and the west. All of those areas have their own kind of pattern, I guess you could say. Like the street grid aligns with everything else, but architecturally it's varied. Again, moving south past like Thomas Streetcar, you get into much more residential areas that are indicative of things like craftsman style, like becomes really popular. So it's like the 20s. It's like you're starting to get into areas like Ardsley Park, like Chatham Crescent, where they're like planned neighborhoods with a grid pattern, but they're all residential. They're not this mixed use anymore like the other districts are. That's its own kind of special area. The more further south you get, there are little clusters of neighborhoods here and there that are intentionally designed with different styles and things like that. And then, of course, it just turns to sprawl like every other city does. Savannah really encompasses, like I said, obviously the landmark district has the older styles like Federal, some Italianate, things like that. But then there's new infill in all of the neighborhoods that do their best. I'll be kind and say that they try to do their best to be compatible infill. Obviously, there's some that just truly miss the mark, but a lot of hopefully that's a good description.
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
It's a huge area to try to cover, but
it is.
there's so many unique things too. And that's the thing that I try to tell people is when they come visit, like even if you just drive around, like don't just stay in the landmark district because there's so much more than just that.
I'm jumping ahead because I was going to talk to you about this a little bit later, but since you've just brought it up, again, for those who are not as familiar with Savannah, maybe are visiting, are interested in there's so much to do there.
There is, yeah.
What are your go-to recommendations for those who are in town?
So obviously we have some amazing house museums. Of course, I'll do a self plug and say the Davenport House is fantastic. We just finished our urban enslaved exhibit that is now in the ground floor that discusses the enslaved peoples that were owned by the Davenports. So obviously I'll do that plug. But then there's also other really fantastic house museums and places that do tours that you can visit. St. John's Cathedral is phenomenal. Owens Thomas House is phenomenal. Green Meldrum House. There's so many beautiful places in the Landmark District that are great. And then there's other areas. Eating and drinking is a huge thing here. And so there are truly some amazing restaurants here, kind of at like any price point that you can think of, that it's just really good food, and some legacy owned businesses and businesses that have been around forever, restaurant wise. So I always recommend spring or fall. At the same time, Tybie's 30 minutes away. So it's like there's give and takes with everything, but I always usually recommend spring or fall.
I guess I call it the historic district, but I guess they're all historic.
Yeah.
So what you're calling the landmark district is kind of, I think, what most people are going to in their minds when they're thinking of Savannah.
Absolutely.
So could you talk to us a little bit about what preservation looks like there and what makes it the landmark district?
Absolutely. So that's actually our office is located in the landmark district as well. So I'm here every day. That's absolutely, like I was talking about earlier, the thing that makes the landmark district so special is that plan, is the city plan.
Okay.
And so the city, I'll give some generic, basic history of, the Savannah Landmark District and when we were founded and things like that, just to help people kind of understand. Savannah was founded in 1733 by General James Oglethorpe. And what makes Savannah so special is, like I said, the city grid plan that is repeated over 20 times, all the way down to Forsyth Park. Preservation here, our local historic district, the period of significance is from 1733 to 1960, which is pretty broad. And we're one of the first landmark historic districts in the country. Actually, recently, in the past probably year or so, maybe a little bit longer, we've been discussing the fact that needs to be updated, that the nomination for the landmark district needs to be updated.
Oh, wow.
Because it doesn't discuss certain things that we know to be important today. Things that in the past history wasn't spoken on as much in that nomination because it was done in the 70s. And, we've talked about, well, does the period of significance need to extend even further to cover those mid-century modern buildings that were constructed, as infill at that time, is now being considered historic. And so there's been lots of discussion about all of those things. Preservation is taken very seriously in the landmark district, gets a lot of scrutiny as well.
Embarrassingly enough, I knew there were, of course, Savannah's got so much history and that it extends outside of that go-to district.
Right.
but I did not realize how many districts there were. I never really gave any thought to why the historic landmark district was kind of the premier district. So thank you for that. I
Absolutely.
had
We're
no
known
idea.
for the green spaces. That's like that was the biggest thing as part of his plan. I guess I could talk about further is the fact that the square in the middle of the plan, for the ward, because it's a repeated ward pattern is what we call it. And so the middle has a square green space, which, originally would have been used like utilitarianly, like there would have been animals or livestock or plantings and things like that, and then over time has transformed into like truly public green spaces, like leisure kind of spaces. And that's that. And then combined with the live oak trees, that's really what makes Savannah so notable, I guess you could say,
Okay.
is because it's very urban, but it also has all of these integrated, planned green public spaces.
So we talked a little bit about challenges in preservation. Everyone is facing this. So let's generalize for a second here. What do you feel are some challenges preservation as a whole faces? And then maybe what are you specifically facing in Savannah as a foundation?
Challenges are constant and they vary really depending on what sector you're dealing with, right? If you're dealing with the private homeowner or if you're dealing with the big developers. And there is a lot of cross pollination and issues that the people all over the country face, and other cities face, and then also issues that we face locally. There's a lot of cross pollination there. Challenges that they include large scale things like climate change and sea level rise because of where we're located.
Mm.
Because there's been so much discussion about people wanting to lift their houses, not necessarily here yet, or on Tybee rather, but that's a big thing that Charleston's considering and having to deal with is flooding and sea level rise and things like that. There's also things that we deal with, like developers, like these big developers that don't want to alter designs to meet something that would be contextually more appropriate here versus Orlando. There's some people that you have to deal with that only really care about the bottom line and they don't really care about doing what's best for the city that they're trying to go into. There's things like a big issue that we face in Savannah is affordable housing and creating housing for people to be able to actually afford to live in. We have a shortage of public housing. And then, there's a lot of developments going up, like apartment developments that are designed well, arguably, but then the market rate is just through the roof. And people can't afford to live here because there's so much tourism sometimes, or there's, the market is just driven up a lot because that's just the way that it is, honestly, all over the country right now.
Yeah, it's outrageous, right?
So, yeah, and so that's a big problem that we've been facing. And then also on the flip side of that is ensuring that people can stay in their homes that they already have. Grandma, who's lived in her house for 50 plus years, making sure that she has the knowledge and the resources to be able to maintain her home, her historic home properly, is another thing that we've been trying to figure out solutions to, especially in areas that are under-recognized or, things like that where education towards preservation is maybe not necessarily the best. So that's something that we've been working towards trying to figure out solutions to as well. Because we just want to make sure that obviously people can stay in their houses.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tough because it's one of those things you don't really think about.
Right.
That the lay person, right? But
Yeah.
that is a harsh reality of all
Yeah.
of this work.
We're hoping one of our big dreams is we're hoping that one day, and I have to really credit my president CEO with this. One of her big dreams is to have a fund for people who need financial assistance, and then they would obviously also get the preservation assistance from me to be able to, recommend something properly if you need a roof repair or a window, making sure that whatever you're putting back is the best for the building and for you and not necessarily just the cheapest option because that's all you can afford.
Well, and that is such an important part of this that we really haven't touched on, but it just sparked a memory for me, even being on my little, not dinky, but like my little teeny tiny historic commission. We used to have people come in because they would get notices of like demolition by neglect and those sorts
Right.
of things.
And code
I
enforcement violations and things like that.
Right. And the financial aspect was almost 85% of the reason they
Right.
weren't doing certain things. There were houses that were even on the National Historic Register, and it's hard to keep up with or to repair right.
Right.
We
Making sure
have,
that you do preservation's best practices.
right. I mean, we have like in this area a lot of spring houses and, barns and that sort of
Right.
thing. And so to preserve those the way that they are quote unquote supposed to be preserved
Right.
is not always inexpensive.
Right.
And so that is one of the challenges of preservation is just helping not even to save something that is already derelict,
Right.
but to help preserve something that is slowly showing signs of wear
Right.
or that,
Right.
even if it isn't, and just knowing that it's important and that you want it to stay in good shape. So I
Yeah.
think sometimes we think of preservation as, do we tear down this building that's like, why are they trying to save this? It's already in shambles. A lot of
Right.
preservation is trying to save things before they get to that point.
Absolutely.
One of the last questions, or second to last questions I have for you,
Okay.
is twofold, because I realized I didn't ask how you got into this work, but then also
Yeah.
for folks who are interested in getting into this work, what sort of recommendations do you have for them?
So I got my start by school. So I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design, the Savannah campus, and I actually transferred here originally as an interior design major. I took an intro to preservation class as an elective. Ashamedly, didn't know that preservation was even a career path at that point. I fell in love with it. For a while, I was double majoring, so I was doing interiors and preservation, and then took a hard look and realized that preservation was where I really wanted to be. I did end up doing a minor in architectural history and interior design, and which I feel like all plays well. I actually moved to Arkansas, but I actually ended up working for an architecture firm in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and helping them do some really amazing projects right out of school. Looking back on it now, I can't believe that I got to do such things right out of school. I worked, like I said, for an architecture firm. I was their preservationist and their designer, so I got to do both. So I was there for a little over 2 years. Moved back to Savannah and worked for another architecture firm, again, doing both. But I wasn't the only preservationist in the office. There was another woman there as well that did preservation. And so we did a lot of things here locally, which was interesting. And then I worked for a preservation contractor. And actually, through that, I became partner in a consulting firm. And then from there, while I was doing that job, well, actually, really, while the whole entire time that I'd been back in Savannah, I was on the Historic District Board of Review because I had done that also when I was in Arkansas. I really saw the problems that we were having locally. I was only able to really do so much, like as a consultant and things, and earn as chair of the board. And so when this position became available, I had obviously already been involved with the organization since I was in school, so I was very familiar. I reached out to my current president CEO, and we had a long conversation about everything and how what I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it. That's how I got here. And it's really interesting actually because this is just a little side note, but
Yeah.
I did actually a presentation for HSF. They were doing women. It was like, they were celebrating Women's Month, and it was me and two other consultants that they had come in and do presentations. And the thing that they wanted us to present on is kind of like, oh, how did you get started in preservation? And, what's your background been? And like, what have you learned? And things like that. And I never really analyzed my own life like that. And so when I really thought back on it, preservation has been in my life for a really long time. Like I grew up in a house, a little 1920s house on an Air Force base. That walkability, like, you know what I mean? Certain
Mhm.
things that you don't realize at the time. And then, my grandmother lives in a very small town in northeastern Pennsylvania, and there's a plethora of historic buildings there too. Just all these different connections and dots that you don't really think about how much they've impacted your life until you
Mhm.
look back at it that way and like through that lens.
That's fun. It seems like it
Yeah.
instilled sort of a quiet appreciation in you that,
Hmm.
yeah, until you really
Yeah.
start to piece those dots together.
It's
So
fun.
for folks who are thinking about preservation, is your number one recommendation essentially making sure you're going to school and studying preservation, or where is the best place for people to start?
I think it depends on what your overall goal is. I think if you're just wanting to be plugged in and do some things locally, obviously, like I've said before, reach out to your nonprofit or get plugged in with like your commission meetings and things like that. Being a local advocate is just as important, if not more important than um, being a professional in the local industry. Like I said, it's, that you have to have a blend of both.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I do think that there is a lot that I learned in school. Like obviously I felt like school was very beneficial and there's so much more that I've even learned outside of school. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a multitude of different ways that you can do it.
My
So
last question for you is, understanding that even in the couple of years that you left Savannah and came back, I'm sure you saw the change.
absolutely.
What is your hope for the future of Savannah?
My hopes and dreams for Savannah. That's such a good question. I hope that, I don't know. I have some personal goals, obviously, of things that I'm working on and initiatives and things like that I hope come to fruition. I hope that overall, we just continue to have this appreciation for the place that we have. Like certain big items get addressed, like housing, like because those are obviously concerns for a lot of people. I think that the tide is turning a little bit in the fact that people are starting to really understand that, if not more now than ever, that just because a developer wants to come in and do a project doesn't mean that we need to bend to the will of the developer.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, if the developer wants to be here, they will work with and collaborate with us. And I think sometimes people forget that. I think that sometimes they think, oh, we have to jump on this opportunity or we're going to miss it. And that's not necessarily the case. As far as like initiatives that I'm working on, I'll give you a little tidbit that's not really released yet, but I'm collaborating with a group of people about a deconstruction ordinance. Deconstruction is a big thing that's starting to be a bigger thing and solution to preservation, to to the demolition of buildings ending up in landfill, and trying to think of a more sustainable, better practice for that. And so that's deconstruction. A lot of major cities in the United States are starting to do this, like San Antonio, Seattle, New York State. There's a lot of people that are really pushing this, that have been pushing this for a long time, that are finally gaining traction and support and recognition for that. I am also currently working on with a team of people. I started this initiative here that I've been wanting to do for a long time, which is the protection of green space and landscapes in Savannah,
Mm.
because public and private, because we've seen the destruction of some gardens that have been upsetting. And a lot of people don't know, I guess, that technically the squares and foresights and things like that are like the grid itself, the plan itself is not protected in any
Oh,
kind of
wow.
way. In previous history, there was a couple squares that they literally built a road straight through them because for emergency accessibility and things like that, which of course they've been now restored to their original intent. But it's just kind of the recognition that these spaces are what makes Savannah unique. Like I've said before, it's one of the many things, but we need to protect those things. Yeah.
Well, my very last thing that I'll kind of throw back to you is that you kindly let me know that May is actually Preservation Month. Talk to us a little bit about what that means in Savannah, but then also what people could be doing in their areas as well.
In Savannah, well, in organizations all over the country, we really try to emphasize Preservation Month and use it as a time for events and education and things like that. For us in particular, we do awards. We do preservation awards annually, and we always have the reception in May. We also do lectures every month anyway, but then we have a special lecture, during Preservation Month. I would highly recommend that, if you want to learn more, reach out to your local nonprofit, because I'm sure that they're doing something for Preservation Month. Most people do. And then the National Trust for Historic Preservation typically does a bunch of things as well.
Well, thank you so much. I have so enjoyed this conversation. I will make sure to post the foundation social media information, website in our show notes for this episode to make sure people can connect with you, see what's going on. Thank you for sharing your insights with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I've loved it.